everybody, my name is Tanya and it's that time of month again. It's my November wrap-up. So as you'll no doubt remember, my November TBR was the most ridiculous of a ridiculous bunch of TBRs that I've done since starting this channel, and it was going to be really interesting to see how far I would get in that November TBR, and I'm really pleased. I had a fantastic reading month. I did work at it and make sure that I got a lot of reading done, but I had a really great reading month, so let's get into it. The first book that I completed for the month of November was one that I started in October, and that was the audiobook of Bleak House by Charles Dickens. So I'd listened to the majority of this in October, but I had a little bit to finish off in November, and I did that within the first week. This wasn't my favourite Dickens that I've read, but I still really enjoyed it. Going from the title, it's obviously quite a bleak story. It's not so much one of his humorous stories. This follows the story of Esther Summerson. Some of it is narrated by her, and then there's also sections covering other characters, and follows the story of a chancery suit, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, and the impact that it has on the various characters' lives. As always, Dickens creates a huge cast of characters in this one, and I think this is his biggest one that I've read yet. So there were the sections narrated by Esther, but then we had a lot of sections that kind of followed various different characters, and you'd have this little snippet about them, and then kind of you'd move away and not see them for a while again, and then suddenly they'd pop up either in Esther's narrative or they'd pop up again in someone else's storyline. And I kind of had to think for a little while sometimes, that was that person, and then alright, I've got it now. So it took me a little bit to keep everybody in their place, because it was such a big cast, but I definitely enjoyed it. The audiobook I had planned after Bleak House was Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf for a group read-along on Goodreads. But since I finished that so early in the month, and the group read technically didn't start until the 15th of the month, I started another audiobook. This is one that I had planned for Read Kids Lit in book form, but I remember that I owned in audio form, so I went with that instead. And that was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. So I had picked out a couple of things last month to read as part of Read Kids Lit, organised by the Words of a Reader, and all the links for that will be down below. This actually turned out to be a very timely and topical read for me when I listened to this, and I made a full video about it that I will link down below. But that was the first book I read for Read Kids Lit. Next up, I read my first Agatha Christie for the month. This was Murder in the Mews, contained within this huge big Hercule Poirot short story collection. This was a collection of 4 short stories, all featuring Hercule Poirot. This was the first time that I read it, and like everything Agatha Christie, was wonderful. I can't say that I necessarily guessed who done it, but there were a couple of elements in some of these that I guessed correctly, so I'm quite pleased with that. Next up was another audiobook, and having finished Black Beauty, still with plenty of time before the 15th of the month when I wanted to start Mrs. Dalloway, I was looking and found another children's book that I forgot I had in audio format, and I did that for Read Kids Lit, something that wasn't actually on my TBR, but I squeezed it in anyway because it was only a few hours long, and that was The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I listened to the audio version of this that was narrated by Anne Hathaway, and it was absolutely fantastic. She did such an amazing job. She had distinctive voices for everybody, and the expression she put into them was just phenomenal, and I would highly recommend checking that one out because I think it was fantastic. I'm sure we're pretty much all familiar with the story of Dorothy and her travels in Oz, but there were a few differences that I found interesting. One in particular being that the shoes weren't actually red, they were silver, and that was strange because we're so used to the film and her ruby red shoes that when they were talking about her silver shoes in the book, it's kind of like, that's not right. But L. Frank Baum invented it, so it's obviously right. But it's funny how much you get that film image in your head and you can't get it out of the way. All in all, I really enjoyed it, and I think it was absolutely fantastic, and I'm so glad I slotted that one in. And the next book I finished was the third book I read for Read Kids Lit this month, and that was Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. So this was just charming. It was lovely. But again, it was slightly topical in that I had elements of animal cruelty and that kind of thing with Black Beauty, and then to go to this side and the realities of farm life was kind of an interesting parallel there too, but didn't affect me quite as strongly as the experience I had reading Black Beauty. Again, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with the story of Charlotte's Web and Wilbur, who is the runt of the litter, who's going to be killed until Fern begs her father to keep him, and then Wilbur having to overcome the usual fate of pigs in a farm with the help of Charlotte. Next up, I finished The River of No Return by B. Ridgway, and Everything that Sarah said about this is true. I thought it was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you should definitely check it out. This book is about time travel and romance and intrigue, and was fantastic. I'm sure Sarah's mentioned it, and it was very obviously indicated on Goodreads, but I went into reading this not actually thinking about it being the first in a series, and I was getting to the end, and things weren't getting resolved, and then I was under 50 pages, and I realised that not everything is going to be wrapped up in this. There's cliffhangers. And I got to the end and I looked, and yes, it's the first book in a series. Be Ridgway, please hurry up and write the next novel because I need to know what happens next now. Thank you. So I'm so pleased that I picked this up and that Sarah has championed it so much on her channel because it is a fantastic read, and I'm so glad that I finally got to it. The next book I finished was the second Agatha Christie that I had to read for the month, Appointment with Death. Again, this was a first time read for me and another Hercule Poirot. This one I was really enjoying, like I was really fascinated by it. And then a couple of elements at the end I'm not quite sure about, and that affected my overall enjoyment of it. This book follows the story of a family who are completely controlled by their mother. So she's kind of portrayed as this really domineering, really quite sinister person who has this hold over her family and really affecting their personalities, and she doesn't allow them to socialize outside, and that I found really fascinating and was waiting to see what would happen with that and what the story behind that was and what was going on there. I don't want to talk about what it was that I didn't like about this because it's completely spoilery. I might put it down someday in a Goodreads review. But there were just some things that jarred me slightly at the end that I wasn't so happy about, or yeah, just something a little bit about it that was slightly off, that I was kind of let down after I had been so really into it and so really fascinated to see what would happen with this story. But as always, it's Agatha and it was fantastic and I really enjoyed it. Back to audiobooks, the next book I finished was finally Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is my second Virginia Woolf after To the Lighthouse, and I enjoyed that one, but I didn't connect with it all that much, so I was interested to see how I would go with this one. So I listened to the audiobook of it, and it took me a good hour to really get at all connected with it. The first hour, so that was kind of my first day of listening to work and to backing, but the next day I found some more things started to happen, or at least there was a bit more that I could latch onto, and I made that connection with it, and from there it was a lot smoother. So this follows a day in the life of Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa Dalloway, who is organising a party for that evening, and it's kind of told in stream of consciousness style, so it follows her travels around and what she's doing, and then there are certain other characters that it jumps to. And so it wasn't until a certain character was introduced, Peter Walsh, that we started to get some reminiscing of past times, and then I found there was something a bit more concrete to latch onto instead of just the stream of consciousness thoughts. So I ended up really enjoying it, and I am intrigued to get to some more Virginia Woolf someday. Next up, I read Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This is the book that I was lent by Jane from Yes Miss Jane, and I finished it, and look, it's still in good condition. I haven't ruined it. This I also ended up really enjoying. The writing isn't that great. Like, the writing itself and the storyline probably was more of a 3-star read for me, but the presentation of it and its uniqueness bumped it up for me, and I gave it a 4 stars. This is a horror story that's set in an IKEA knockoff, huge, department store, and strange things are happening at night, so some people will have to stay back after hours and do a night shift to try and get to the bottom of what's happening. I don't read a lot of horror at all. It's not something that I've ever really read all that much of, and I didn't find this particularly scary at all. It's not really that kind of, I guess it could be that kind of thing, but it wasn't really all that scary to me. But it did have some atmosphere about it, and I can see how a huge big furniture store like that could be quite creepy after hours with the lights out. So Jane, thank you once again for lending me this. It was so kind of you, and I really enjoyed it, and I will get it home to you soon. Next up was my third Agatha Christie for the month, and that was Hercule Poirot's Christmas, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This is another one that has kind of that overbearing tyrant character that Appointment with Death had, and I really enjoyed it here too. This one is the story of a family who's overseen by quite a tyrannical old man, but the whole family is brought together for the first time in many years at Christmas, and tempers flare, and there's a lot of tension between different family members, and as expected, the old man is violently murdered, And Hercule Poirot has to come in on Christmas Eve and solve the murder. And as always, the solution is fantastic, and there's something that I really want to say, but it's really spoilery. And again, I might put it in a spoilery Goodreads review at some point in time, because it's something that I found funny, but I can't really say. But again, as always, it's Agatha, it's wonderful, and anybody who hasn't read any Agatha before should definitely check her out. And that's technically all the things that I completed in the month of November, but there's one more thing that I'm going to count as completed, because I only had a tiny little bit left, and I finished on the 1st. I'm filming this on the 2nd, and that is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. This was the BookTube Reading Buddies buddy read this month. Sword in the Stone, which is the basis for the first book in this series, was one of my all-time favourite Disney movies as a child, and I rewatched it so many times. And I enjoyed this, but I do like the movie better. And that's possibly nostalgia talking, and the fact that it was such a childhood favourite, but I did find that I enjoyed that more. So I did really enjoy this, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I had expected to or was hoping to, because it was one of my favourites, and because I've heard so many great things about it. Because I am interested in Arthurian legend, but I haven't actually read all that much about it, I was interested to see how I would go with this, and as I said, I did definitely enjoy it, but it was quite strange, the style. It's a very random kind of telling. We kind of jump around and then we shove important things at the end of the books, or there's a strange amount of kind of modern references within it. The books in this were published kind of through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, so they're quite modern compared to Arthurian time, but throwing in little references. So in the beginning of the 3rd book, we had a lot of cricket references. The 3rd book focuses on Lancelot, and they actually compare him to Don Bradman, who was the famous Australian cricketer Don Bradman, because of his battling average. And so there were a lot of these kind of haha cricket puns that came in there, which you don't exactly expect for a book on Arthurian legend. So I found that really interesting. So to a couple more things that I started in November but haven't finished. Sam from Novels and Nonsense has organised the Very Christmas Dickens read-along, which is a read-along that started in November and continuing through to Christmas to read some of the Christmas stories of Charles Dickens. I'll leave a link to Sam's announcement video for this and to the Goodreads group down in the description if you want to join. But I've started participating in that, and I will talk about that more soon. And then finally, after reading Mrs. Dalloway, my next audiobook that I had picked out was The Hours. That was the companion read for that one, but technically the read for that one is the December group read, so that's December 15th that it starts. So I decided that I would throw another audiobook in between. Another one that I remembered that I owned in audiobook form as well as book form, and something that was in my TBR for Read Kids Lit, I started listening to Watership Down by Richard Adams. I'm about 4 hours in, or about a quarter of the way through, and I'm enjoying it so far, and I will talk about it more when I'm finished. And so that covers everything that I read for the month, and basically I hit everything that I wanted to. There were the 2 books, my bonus picks for Read Kids Lit, that I didn't get to, but I hadn't expected to anyway, and that was The Witches and Little Princess. But otherwise, I kind of got to everything that I was wanting to. I started Watership Down, which I wasn't expecting, and I'm feeling really good about all that. So this, astoundingly, is everything that I was able to read in the month of November. As I said before, that Agatha Christie one really throws it out a little bit because it is only a portion of that. But otherwise, I think I had a fantastic month. If you've read any of the books that I read in this month, or if you have any questions about any of them, let me know down in the comments, as I'd be really interested. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!